I began sculpting by wood carving and stone carving, but clay is really the ultimate medium. It's the medium in which you have complete flexibility. For me, sculpting is a way of giving form and meaning to the mess that surrounds us. When I began Athena, I started by making a 1/10th scale model, which was about 4 feet tall. In that model, I was trying to capture the lifelike quality of the stance, so I used a human model. I began by sculpting Athena's face because that's where most of her character is evident. For me, she's very masculine and at the same time sensuous. After you model something in clay, you then have to cast it, which is a process that I've had to use for the entire statue. Sculpturally speaking, it's a much better work because it was modeled in clay first. The statue is cast in gypsum cement, which is really just a hard plaster. It's reinforced with chopped fiberglass, which allows me to make a strong but lightweight structure.
I've always identified really closely with the character of Athena. I've always liked Athena. I've always felt really proud that there was in history a feminine being that was just about everything and basically was the companion of heroism, because I think very much that women are companions, if not heroes themselves. It was very hot and very hard work, and you had to really apply yourself to it. But there was a great satisfaction with using the Sawzall and cutting down through the plaster and knowing just how far to go before you hit the mold part, and gauging that by the feel of the plaster. And that's where, you know, your own inner sense and your own expertise comes in. The moment that the first mold fell off the face, it was like the moment that the first clay part of the head was finished. And it was one more step towards completion, and I really at that moment could begin to imagine what Athena looked like. It was wonderful. It was like uncovering a living being. I felt close to her then.
When we broke open the first molds, I was very reassured that the beauty I'd had in the clay had not been lost, because the pieces came out very easily from the plaster molds. To a large extent, the process became a big construction project. At least that was going on at the same time that I was sculpting other parts, so that I really had two jobs. One as reconstructing the statue, which was purely technical, and at the same time still having to do the artistic part on the rest of the parts of Athena. The sculptor of the original statue was Phidias, who also designed all the sculpture on the Parthenon. A lot of the decisions about details on the statue depend on your opinion of who Phidias was. Was he a great innovative sculptor or not? And I think he was.
On the one hand, we think we know a great deal about the Athena, because we are very well documented. We know the name of the person who made it. We know when it was made. We have the building accounts that even talk about the selling of the surplus of gold and ivory. So we know the time when the Athena must have been finished in 438 before Christ. And you'd think you could almost touch it because we also have so many reproductions of the Athena in Roman copies and in jewelry and in the minor arts. But the point is, we don't have the Athena herself. We don't have the statue. We only have the echoes of the statue. And each period filtered those echoes through the language of their own time.
Whether it was carried off with a lot of its precious material intact and carried off for that, whether it had already undergone repairs so the precious material didn't exist in it anymore and had been reconstructed. What really happened to it is one of the great mysteries.
Athena and Athens are inseparable in a way. Athens was very special. It was in the area of Attica, and Athens was the capital. And it has always been debated whether it is the goddess that gives the name to the city or whether it is the city that gives the name to the goddess. We don't even know that, but we do know that Athena is the primary goddess of Athens. We cannot call it a cult statue in the real sense of the word. There was always a more venerable idol on the Acropolis that was much earlier and more primitive. And I think that that was the real cult image for the Athenians. That was the one that attracted their pure worship. I think the golden ivory Athena by Phidias was much more of a symbol. It was much more of a colossal image that impressed with its value and its appearance. I have to confess that when I was first asked to give some advice on this project, I was negative, because I had the impression that it was absolutely impossible to recreate a statue from the past on which the evidence was really so limited. Visual evidence is, that is, not the information in general, but the information in terms of actual statues. So at first I said, oh, I don't think this can be done, I don't think it should be done. And then the more I thought about it, the more excited I got. Because here you have a replica of the Parthenon that is the exact size of the Parthenon. It is as accurate as it could be made on the basis of our knowledge at the time when the Parthenon was built. You have something that not even in Athens is available today. The presence of the walls, the limits of the space, the roof over the building, which you cannot find in the Parthenon in Athens. And to see the statue at the original size within that original space would have taught us a great deal. This project has become to me very important. I want to learn from it, and I think lots of people will learn from it.
I can't emphasize enough how rare it is to have a branch of metropolitan government, a parks department, involved in something of this sort, and to be so supportive. I did feel that it should be a full recreation, and so did the other members of the park board, because the proportions were a big part of the story. We would not have ever known how the statue worked with the architectural proportions if we hadn't had a full-scale recreation. It would just have been not worth doing on a smaller scale. We had 7 proposals. Full scale was a problem for many of them. I think that quite a few wanted to do a small size replica and would not even consider the large scale. Those that were interested in the large scale had simplified it to the point of abstraction, the shield with no figures on it, for instance. Alan Lequire was the only sculptor who proposed to add as much detail as time and his abilities would allow. And that impressed us. Plus the fact that he he had a good track record already in doing the kind of sculpture that we felt would be very related to what the Athena probably was.
I wanted to make the most accurate replica that is possible today with what we know. And I went to Greece for 2 weeks and met archaeologists there and talked to them about the statue. When I visited the Parthenon and stood in the spot where the original statue was, I think I was hoping for some divine inspiration that would tell me exactly what the statue looked like. What I did get was a sense of the space and how the statue would have animated the entire building from the inside out. Before I got this commission, I hadn't done anything on this scale, although when I studied in Rome, I observed the construction of a 26-foot tall statue of the Virgin Mary for the island of Capri. Around the turn of the century in the United States, there were several sculptors who were working on this scale, and nothing on this scale has really been done since. It was exciting to me to rediscover simply the technical means to enlarge something to this scale.
I know that one of the things that I was struck by was the terrible necessity that a sculptor has of destroying the most beautiful thing that he has just made in the process of making those molds. Over and over again, we saw the pieces made out of clay, shiny and perfect in every detail. And then this plaster gets thrown on top of that, and finally the pieces of plaster get torn off the clay. The clay is completely disfigured by it, and this artist does this to his own work. I think it's like dying every time.
Where Alan's studio was on Bass Street was one of the most magical and wonderful communities of artists anywhere that I've experienced in my life in living in different cities. Alan lost everything in the fire except a handful of things that he brought out. He lost a very beautiful 4-foot statue, the original model that he won the commission from, and he lost the 9-foot model. And his home, everything that he'd put into that, for the last 5 years. And as he sadly laments, the thing that he misses most is the work that friends and other teachers had given him along the way. A real tragedy about an era being lost.
Fortunately, I'd stored all the cast pieces of Athena in a warehouse and at the Parthenon itself. So I was able to just go on working with the reconstruction of the statue in the Parthenon. When I finish this statue, it will have taken me 7 years, which is 2 years less time than it took Phidias to create the original. In a lot of ways, using the same methods that he would have used. The materials are different, of course, and his statue would have been a lot more complex to build. It was a wooden core statue, carved wooden blocks attached to a central wooden pillar. And then it was covered in gold and ivory, all the garments being gold and all the skin parts being ivory. In terms of form, I think the Greeks understood the swell, the entasis in form better than anyone else has ever understood it. I've tried to put into this work what I appreciate the most out of classical sculpture, which is a sense of life, an animate quality.
I came to Nashville in 1987 spring. Then I met Alan Lacquire, Then I showed my pictures, sculptures, so he very interested. Then he offered me job. I really liked Greek mythology. It's so very interesting. You know, they have many stories about, about Athena too. It's like fantasy. We have the mythology in Japan, but it's totally different. People donate the money for this project. In Japan, maybe we couldn't do that, donate the money to make this statue. Then I thought, this is America. That's good.
I've worked primarily with Brunhilde Ridgway on the overall statue, making sure that the garments, the stance, and the total composition are consistent with what we know about the original.
Oh, come on. Let me look at it first. I wanted very much to see what it looks like. It is tremendous. But I thought it would look bigger because I've seen the sections with you for scale next to it. And yet, it's really the environment that makes the difference to see how it works out. Also, I was told that there is a wonderful correspondence between statue and colonnade. But I have a picture of this, I think, in my own 5th century book, I think. Or if nothing else, I have the reference. Look up the reference if nothing else, because then you can find it. I also brought you something. I brought you a reprint, but we'll have to Xerox it if I'm going to leave it with you, because that's all I have, of an article by Eve Harrison that talks about the possible head for the Nike. No, it should be like this.
Straight up and then down.
And then down. You see some of the lions that do that.
Especially
Especially here, the wonderful rippling of chocolate. That's me because I have a chocolate mind. It has to be gold. That we know for sure. Because, for instance, we know for the Zeus that some people even cut off some of the curls because they were solid gold.
Yeah.
So in the Athena, it has to be gold.
I was looking for her pieces of jewelry.
Yeah, and they have a picture of the Kuloba medallions here. Yeah. The helmet is one of the most elaborate parts of the Athena. It is of the Attic type. It means that it has movable chick pieces that were attached on hinges, and so they could be lifted when the helmet was not being used in actual combat. And the unusual feature of the 3 crests, which makes it an absolutely formidable helmet. You normally had only 1 crest on a helmet, and this has 3.
A lot of the symbolic emphasis of the statue is political in nature because of the circumstances of when it was constructed. It was primarily meant to celebrate Athens' victory over the Persians. So on the statue there was a lot of detail which is meant to represent the Eastern Persian barbaric tribes and how they're being subjugated. The Nashville Parthenon was built as part of the Centennial Exhibition at a time when they undertook massive sculptural projects like this. However, at that time they thought they did not have enough evidence to provide an accurate version of the statue. So this project, which I will complete in the next 6 months, is basically the end of a project which began in 1897.
The miracle of what he did was that he took the pieces that there was absolute evidence for, and he imagined himself so completely into the head and soul of this ancient sculptor that we feel he really gave us probably a very credible recreation, but it's totally Alan's own aesthetic that is at work there. It's his skill as a sculptor that made it. The head, the folds, the way they fall, the mural, all the details, the little scroll work, all of those things are Alan's. He based them on, research, but then he had to put them together, and it's wonderful what happened.
On her hand alights a Nike, a symbol of victory, that probably in her hands held a wreath to crown Athena victorious. The whole symbolism is the war is over. Athena has won. Now, you might take it at two levels. You might take it to purely mythological level and say this is the victory against the giants. We know that that was a major event in the history of the gods in which the giants rebelled against the Olympians and the Olympians won. And Athena was instrumental in achieving that victory. So from this point of view, you could say it's a mythological commemoration. On the other hand, you can also think that it is a very clear allusion to the end of the Persian Wars. So the Athenians have defeated the Persians. And I think it really, in the long run, it depends how sophisticated the viewer was, because that type of statue could have reached any individual. There would have been some who would have been simply impressed by the size of the figure and seen it simply as the goddess of the city. There would have been some who would have caught specifically the allusion to the victory and therefore would have thought gigantomachy. And then there would have been some who would have taken it into more historical terms and seen the allusion to the Persian Wars. And finally, there would even have been the philosophers who would have said, she's so big, she's so aloof, she's so different, she doesn't relate to us mortals. The Olympians don't care what happens to men. So you can take it at various levels. I'm sure each person who saw the statue saw it differently. But everybody would have been impressed.
I think all the volunteers who helped Alan were drawn to it partly because of the atmosphere that he created around the project itself. There was a deep sense of almost meditation, and that appealed to some of the people who were working on it. There were 50 of them in the end. They would come and go. Some stayed on for a few years, but most of them just a few months. I mean, it's work that is unbelievably slow. And one of the great things that came from the slowness of the pace, though, was a sense of peace and a sense of wonderful quiet.
The volunteers for this project really require and deserve a lot of credit. We have had incredible volunteers. I met my wife working on this project. Alan has had just, great luck with the people that have just, come forth. Real community spirit. A lot of community spirit has gone into this.
I've almost finished the preliminary smoothing of the 3 tons of clay, and now I'm working on figure placement. There are 30 figures that are on the shield, all approximately half-life size. The hardest part is deciding on the placement of the figures. I've consulted with Eve Harrison at the Institute of Fine Arts in New York, primarily on details of the statue, such as the shield and the base. She is the scholar who has done the most recent and I think the most complete reconstruction of the shield, and therefore I used her interpretation, her reconstruction.
The story that is represented on the outside of the shield is the battle of the Athenians against the Amazons. You see the Amazons being defeated, falling, being stabbed, axed, done away with. On the Athena Parthenos, we have the head of Medusa. Legend is that the head of Medusa was cut off by Perseus with the help of Athena, and that Athena then took this head and put it either in the center of her shield or in the center of her aegis, the snake-like cloak that she wears over her shoulders and breast.
No, this is won't be able to clamp it.
Oh, that's right. Hold it. Okay. What do you want to do this? A little bit, maybe 1/16th, the difference.
Don't worry about it.
Okay.
We'll just grind it.
All right, last piece.
See how it fits.
Turn over. I am. No, I mean this way.
Flip it.
Yeah. You say turn over. Great.
It's better than I thought.
Yeah.
Great.
As you went around and read the whole story, you would see the courage, the struggles, the difficulties, and the final victory of the Greeks fighting these exotic invaders. Its story is the defense of Athens. And the shield is the most important place for it to be because the shield is the weapon of defense. Athena stands with her shield by her side. She is not in the act of fighting. She stands with the victory on her other hand. So it means that she is victorious, but she is ready to defend.
And you have her spear. So everything in the appearance of Athena indicates that she's dressed for war. But the shield is by her foot, so she has finished. She has won. You also see, however, the Athena as the patroness of the citadel, because the great snake that is coiled inside the shield is the snake of the Acropolis. The Athenians thought that they were autochthonous, that is to say, born of the earth. They had not come from somewhere else. They were really native right there. And of course, in an area that has been so riddled with invasions, it was very important for them to say they were the original inhabitants of that land. And a snake, because he lives underground, because he seems to be immortal, because he sheds his skin, and therefore it was thought to acquire a new life, a new cycle, a new youth every time he shed his skin. For that reason, the snake is always thought to be a typical representative of the earth, a chthonian symbol, meaning an underground symbol. So the snake is also an allusion to the autochthonous nature of the Athenians. The Athena Parthenos base as the birth of Pandora, which is a rather peculiar event in that Pandora was the source of all evils. She opened the box that contained all evils of mankind, and they all flew out, and only hope was left at the bottom. So you might say that that was a slap in the face of the human beings, as it were. Why commemorate an event that turned into suffering for mankind? All we know is the account in Pausanias, who was a 2nd century after Christ traveler, who wrote a guidebook and described many of the monuments that he saw on his way very systematically. He was the first writer of a guidebook that we have from antiquity, and he therefore tells us that that was the subject of the base. But otherwise, we would have very little notion about it.
The original statue was almost entirely covered in cast gold plates. We're using real gold leaf in an attempt to make the statue as authentic as possible.
There is no such thing as right and wrong in our theories of antiquity. There is one theory that might be closer to the truth, but we all keep on trying to reconstruct the past. And eventually, extreme theories get eliminated, and you come to a sort of a middle of the way understanding of what went on.
When people look at Athena, I hope that they feel in touch with the most noble qualities within themselves and reminded that the very essence of everything that she stands for is in each one of us.
I think, if anything, I'll miss the atmosphere that surrounded the work on Athena and the camaraderie that was shared by all the people who helped build the statue. I hope that when people view Athena, that they will immediately sense the life in the statue, and through that experience, change their idea of history.